Let's talk about something happening in Chicago public schools, because the more you dig into this, the more questions it raises. Some schools were allowed to take students, even very young ones, on field trips to a political rally for May Day. When I was a kid, we danced around a maypole for May Day and went back to class. Now, before people start shouting, yes, I know what they're going to say, technically it was voluntary. School wasn't canceled, kids could stay behind. Okay, let's talk about what voluntary actually looks like in a real school. You've got a teacher in charge. You've got a class full of kids going. You've got a bus waiting outside. And we're supposed to believe a kindergartner is going to raise their hand and say, no thanks, I'm going to sit this one out. That's not how schools work, and we all know it. But here's the part people really don't want to say out loud. It's not just the kids who feel pressure, it's the parents too. Because in theory, sure, you can opt your child out. In reality, you're dealing with a system where that teacher writes your child's report card, that administrator controls placement decisions, and that school decides who's cooperative and who's difficult. And parents know, whether people admit it or not, that pushing back can come with consequences you can't quite prove, but you can definitely feel. So tell me again how voluntary this really is. This is what power looks like when it doesn't have to raise its voice. Now let me anchor this the way the Constitution was designed to anchor it. Public schools are government institutions, so the Constitution still applies. The First Amendment matters because the state can't force a viewpoint, and it can't use its authority to pressure speech. And the 14th Amendment matters because due process is supposed to protect families from arbitrary punishment and retaliation when they don't go along to get along. This isn't about left versus right. It's about whether government has a limit. Caution line, because I'm not here to overclaim. Not every school decision is unconstitutional. But when the state organizes political participation, it's fair to ask whether it crossed the line from teaching civics to pushing a viewpoint. Now, let me say this clearly because I already know how people twist things. I'm not saying there should be no politics in school. I taught school. I taught third grade. I taught government, the structure of government, the roles, the parties. We had discussions, real ones, but I never told my students what to believe. I showed them both sides. I gave them the tools, and then I sent them home to talk to their families. Because every child comes from a different background, different beliefs, different experiences. That's education. You teach them how to think, not what to think. But this is different. This isn't teaching about civic engagement. This is organizing participation in it under school authority. And that's a line. We've actually already settled this kind of issue in another area, religion. Students can pray. They can read religious texts. They can express their beliefs. That's their right. But the second a teacher says, all right, class, let's all pray together, now we've got a problem. Why? Because the authority figure crossed the line from allowing expression to leading it. And here's the part that matters. We don't let teachers lead prayer because the state can't sponsor religion. Same principle here. The state can't sponsor a political viewpoint either. If a family wants to take their child to a rally, that's their choice. If a student develops political opinions, that's fine. But when the school organizes it, funds it, schedules it, and moves groups of students toward one specific event, it's not neutral anymore. And I want you to catch the difference. A civics lesson says, here's how protests work, here's how elections work, here's how to write your representative, here's how to evaluate claims. A field trip to a rally says, this is the side we're validating with school authority. And if you think kids don't feel that, you've never been in a classroom, because every classroom is mixed. You've got kids from Democrat families, Republican families, families who don't follow politics at all, families who are immigrants, families who are struggling, families who just want their kid to learn to read. Now imagine being the one child thinking, my family doesn't believe this, but your whole class is going. Your teacher is leading it. The energy in the room is already decided. Tell me that kid doesn't feel it. That's not education. That's pressure. And it's not just pressure on kids. It's pressure on parents. Because the people who'll defend this love to talk like parents have total freedom. But parents aren't dealing with a neutral system. They're dealing with a system that can label them. A system that can make their child's year easier or harder. A system where you can be treated differently and never get a memo explaining why. So when you say voluntary, you'd better be honest about what that means when you're talking about 5-year-olds in a government institution. Now, here's another layer nobody wants to talk about. Chicago public schools serve a lot of low-income students. Schools receive additional federal support like Title I funding, specifically to improve academic outcomes. And academic results are still uneven, especially when it comes to college readiness. So when you've got limited time, limited resources, and students who need as much academic support as possible, why are we spending any of that time and any of those resources, even general funds, buses, staff coordination, for politically aligned field trips? No, Title I money can't be used for that. It's restricted. But the buses, the logistics, the staff time, the planning, the supervision, that's still taxpayer supported, and public schools are funded by everybody, not just the families who agree with the rally, not just the families who vote the right way, everybody. So with that funding comes a responsibility. Stay neutral, not silent, not disengaged. Neutral. Teach the system. Teach how to participate. Teach how to think critically. Then let families take it from there. And if someone says, well, kids have free speech, yes, they do. But there's a difference between a student choosing to speak and the government organizing the stage and marching the class to it. That's why this feels wrong. Because it's not just kids expressing themselves, it's the institution steering them. Now let's connect this to something we already settled as a country. We decided people shouldn't be forced to support political speech they disagree with. That's why mandatory union fees were struck down. So when public schools, government institutions start organizing trips that lean one direction politically, it raises a similar concern. Not identical, but similar enough to make people uncomfortable. And honestly, it should. Because this isn't about Trump. It's not about left or right. It's about whether parents, all parents, can trust schools to stay in their lane. Teach the kids. Give them the tools. Let the families handle the politics. And if the school wants to teach civic engagement, great. Teach the First Amendment. Teach how to disagree without hate. Teach how to verify information. Teach how to write a persuasive argument. Teach how to read a ballot. Teach how to spot propaganda without taking sides. Teach how to think. But don't use government authority to herd little kids into a political moment they don't understand. Because if you're too young to understand what you're protesting, you're not participating in democracy. You're being used. But hey, what do I know? I'm just someone who remembers when teaching civics meant opening a textbook, not drawing protest signs when you're too young to understand what you're protesting.